Welcome to The Explainer. Let's just dive right in, shall we? When we think about the creation of the United States, we almost always picture a room packed full of men in powdered wigs, right? It's that classic Founding Fathers narrative. But today, we're going to completely flip that script. We're looking past the obvious to uncover how power actually operated behind the scenes in the early republic. We're talking about some truly incredible women who literally engineered the business and legal foundations of the nation. So, who really pulled the strings back then? For centuries, we've all been handed this myth of the passive founding mother, women silently pouring tea while the guys debated the Constitution. But the historical reality? The true power dynamics of the era were way more complex and, frankly, a whole lot more fascinating than your standard history textbook usually lets on.
I mean, talk about a profound paradox. On one hand, you have women in the 1700s who were legally marginalized. They were completely denied the vote, and legally speaking, they were treated as property or dependents. Yet in practice, these exact same women were out there managing massive financial estates, they were directing national political strategy, and, get this, even defeating enslavers in state supreme courts. They were executing these massive, history-making moves entirely from the shadows.
Okay, moving to Section 1, Economic Agency, Abigail Adams and the Peacefield Nest Egg.
Think about this for a second. How exactly do you build a financial empire when society literally expects you to stay in the shadows? Because during the Revolutionary period, managing wealth was a highly technical, grueling job. It wasn't just about pinching pennies. We're talking about running incredibly complex agricultural supply chains and figuring out how to mitigate massive wartime inflation, all without the basic legal protections that men had at the time.
You've probably heard that famous quote where Abigail Adams warns her husband, saying, "Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion." We almost always focus on her rhetorical fire here, right? Her lobbying of John Adams while he's off working on the Declaration of Independence. But her actual power, her real leverage, wasn't just in those words. It was deeply rooted in her day-to-day financial mastery.
While John Adams was away for years, serving in Congress and then over in Europe as an ambassador, Abigail stepped up as the sole executive of the Peacefield Farm in Quincy, Massachusetts. And she didn't just keep the lights on. She was actively speculating on land, managing tenant farmers, and skillfully navigating these highly volatile currency markets to grow the Adams family's financial nest egg. She was an absolutely formidable economic manager. Honestly, she single-handedly ensured the family had the wealth needed to bankroll John's entire political career.
But wait, her agency didn't stop at the property line. Far from it. Beyond the farm, Abigail wielded immense press influence. When John became president and started facing fierce partisan criticism from the rival press, Abigail stepped right into the fray. She discreetly planted stories in Boston newspapers. She'd send home specific letters and articles that she wanted published to actively defend the president. She was a deeply shrewd political operator, fiercely protecting both her family's public standing and their financial interests.
Which brings us to Section 2, Political Strategy, Dolley Madison's White House Balances.
Now, you might be wondering, how on earth can interior decoration and social gatherings become tools of national political strategy? We definitely have this tendency to view early First Ladies merely as decorators or hostesses, but we really need to look past that surface level to see the intense, calculated political strategy behind Dolley Madison's actions.
See, Dolley Madison was the first presidential spouse to fully embrace the role and completely renovate the White House, and doing so required a masterful diplomatic and economic balancing act. Think about it. She had to project this international elegance with sophisticated wallpaper and imported china just to impress foreign diplomats, ensuring this fragile young nation was taken seriously on the world stage. But at the exact same time, she had to maintain what they called Republican modesty, basically keeping things simple enough to appease her domestic political critics who were terrified of a return to a European-style monarchy. Oh, and she had to execute all of this under strict fiscal responsibility. She managed a major procurement and renovation project without bankrupting the administration. Absolutely brilliant.
And then there's her social strategy. Consider the concept of the Dove Party. Now, these weren't just polite little tea times. These were exclusive social gatherings hosted by Dolley where congressional wives discussed current events. In reality, they functioned as high-level, informal political networks. Dolley used these events as highly effective intelligence-gathering operations to inform her husband, President James Madison, on political strategies and all the varying sentiments bubbling up in Congress.
And when a true national crisis hit, Dolley set a precedent that changed everything.
During the War of 1812, as British troops were literally bearing down on Washington, D.C., she outright refused to evacuate the White House until she had personally secured Gilbert Stuart's famous portrait of George Washington, along with a ton of critical government documents. Her wartime bravery permanently expanded the responsibilities and the public expectations of the First Lady. From that moment on, it wasn't just a social role, it was a recognized position of national resilience.
Let's move on to Section 3, Legal Trailblazer, Elizabeth Freeman dismantles property.
Okay, let's dive into a truly profound question here. How do you fight a law when the system itself is designed to deny you a voice? How does an enslaved woman navigate and ultimately defeat a legal structure that was explicitly built to oppress her and legally treat her as property?
Well, here's how it happened. In 1780, the new Massachusetts Constitution was adopted, and it featured a Declaration of Rights, famously stating that all men are born free and equal. Elizabeth Freeman, who was also known as Mum Bet, heard this document being read aloud. She recognized the constitutional loophole immediately. By 1781, she partnered with an attorney named Theodore Sedgwick and actually sued her enslaver. She actively weaponized the state's own foundational wording against the system. And it worked. By August of that year, a jury in the County Court of Common Pleas agreed that the Constitution did indeed outlaw slavery, and they granted her freedom. This kicked off a massive ripple effect, culminating in 1783 with the Quock Walker case, where the state's highest court cemented the precedent, ruling slavery totally repugnant to the Constitution.
Her epitaph really says it best. She was born a slave and remained a slave for nearly 30 years. She could neither read nor write, yet in her own sphere she had no superior or equal. It's just a powerful reminder that true legal brilliance doesn't require formal education. What it requires is the sharp intellect to dissect constitutional promises and the immense courage to actually demand them for yourself.
And the result of that courage? Zero. Thanks to the monumental legal precedents set by Elizabeth Freeman and the subsequent Quock Walker case, exactly 0 slaves resided in Massachusetts by the 1790 census. Think about the magnitude of that. One woman's legal agency effectively dismantled an entire state's system of slavery. It's just incredible. Finally, we arrive at Section 4, a new American precedent, synthesizing the spheres of power.
So let's pull all these threads together. Abigail Adams forged the model of the First Lady as a formidable economic manager and confidential political advisor. Dolley Madison proved that cultural hostessing and social strategy were absolutely vital tools for national unity and diplomatic survival. And Elizabeth Freeman demonstrated that foundational legal documents could be leveraged by the marginalized to force real systemic constitutional change. The big takeaway here is that these women didn't just passively witness the early republic. No way. They actively engineered its economic, cultural, and legal foundations.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought. If these women achieved all of this while legally marginalized and forced to operate in the shadows, how much more of our history is shaped by voices we haven't fully heard yet? It really makes you question the traditional historical narrative, doesn't it? Thank you so much for exploring these hidden histories with me today on The Explainer. Keep asking questions, keep looking past the obvious, and we'll see you next time.